Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, and welcome to another very exciting training video. Today we're going to be taking a look at some train destruction. So we've got this train flying through the air. We've got debris flying everywhere, explosions. We've already covered the explosion and compositing on the After Effects side. So today we're going to take a look at creating the train flying through the air and all of the debris pieces. We're going to be using 3ds Max, and most of these techniques are going to be pretty generic. So if you know how to do some rigid body simulations in, say, Cinema 4D, the idea should be pretty similar. Let's go and take a look at setting this up. Now, I will warn you, I'm going to try to make this look as good as possible while doing as little work as possible. So we're going to be doing some lazy texturing and some other things, so I apologize. All right, so let's go and get started. What I have here is an oil tanker model from TurboSquid. So it doesn't have any textures. We're just going to go in and try to make it look like a metal tanker from the original shot, so something like this. And then we're going to set it up for some destruction. Now, I've already prepared a couple of textures that we're going to be using. What I want to do is hit M, and that's going to bring up our material editor. Now, I'm using Max 2010. Some things are a little bit different, but for the most part, everything should be pretty similar. We're also going to be using Vray. I'm going to select a Vray material. Now, Vray is a separate renderer for 3D Max. So if we go down here, we can see we have Vray selected. And this is just a preferred render engine for 3ds Max. So we'll go and close that. And now we have our Vray material. So I'm going to go ahead, load our metal grunge texture into the diffuse and the specular into the reflection slot. Now, if we double click on it, we can see it up close. It's a little too reflective. Let's bring the glossiness down to about 0.8, and that'll make the material somewhat blurry, or the reflection somewhat blurry. Let's click on the map, and let's go down to the output, and we're going to adjust the color map. So this is kind of like the intensity of the map, and I just want to darken it a bit. You know, this isn't a very reflective material, but just a little bit. Okay, now we can click on this button to go back up to the top, and we'll go into the diffuse, and let's turn on the show map in viewport. So then we'll select our train and drop our texture on top of it. So we'll assign to selection, bam, look at this texture job. Now, I'm probably not going to change this, but the bottom plate here is a little stretched, so let's fix that as best we can. Let's just do like a UVW map. And what the UVW map is just a way to change the size of the UV map. It came from TurboSquid, so it may not be set up exactly right. So we're just going to set it to box and, I don't know, stretch it out a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so now let's go and load our background image. I've taken a screenshot of the train, and we're going to drop it in, set it as a background and an environment map. This is going to help us align this. Now, let's go into the render settings really quick, and let's set the output for HD. So we'll click on HD 720. Then if we come over here to perspective, we can do show safe frame, and that will show our HD frame. So even if we stretch our viewport, it'll only show the HD frame that matches our plate. So we're going to move this around and try to align it using some of these tools here. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then let's create a camera from view and maybe set it as a 35mm lens. And then orbit this back into place. All right, that's looking pretty good, and our camera's locked. Now, if we hit P, we'll go back into a perspective, and then we can zoom in. So if we hit Z, that'll zoom in on the object that you have selected. Now, one of the things I need to do is attach the different pieces. Right now, everything's sort of separated. So let's select our tanker, and we'll come over here to attach, and then click on that top part, this guy, maybe these connectors here. And so now if I unclick that, this whole object is going to be one large piece. So that's going to be good. Let G hide that grid. And everything down here is also individual pieces, but we'll go and leave that, and maybe it'll be cool to have those pieces flying around during the simulation. Go ahead and put this back down. And we can hit C to go back to the camera. I also want to create a ground plane. Alt-W, we'll zoom out. We'll go to the Create box, and we're just going to click, drag a box, and then drag down, which will create a negative box so that our surface will be flat. And then maybe grab our train and just put it a little lower on the tracks or on the plane. Okay, let me just add a couple of segments. That way I can see it in wireframe. F3, by the way, switches to wireframe. We've got it set up. Now we need to do our simulation of the pieces flying everywhere. To do that, we're going to be using a tool called Rayfire. So again, it's a third-party tool, but it's pretty industry standard, and it's really powerful. So we'll click on Rayfire. We'll click on the Rayfire floater and open that up. And this is just going to give us a bunch of custom options. And we'll talk about them as we need them. There's a lot of stuff this does that we're not going to be getting into, but hopefully we can touch on some of the key features. One of the things I need to do is create an object that's going to knock all of these pieces into the air. Now, we can use an explosion force, but instead of that, I actually am just going to use a piece of geometry. I'm going to use a sphere. Go to the top view here, and I'm just going to make a large sphere. Then I'm going to take, I'm going to right click, we're going to choose scale, and we're going to flatten it out. And I'm just going to use this to knock the train up into the air. So what I'll do is position it right under the train, turn on auto key, move forward a couple of frames, and then just push it up into the air. Then we'll shut off auto key. I'm actually going to rotate this and maybe forward because we want to knock the train up and forward. And that's what's cool about using this object is it can help push the things in the direction we want it to go. So here we go. Boom. Back in Rayfire. Now, one of the things I need to do is pre-fracture some of these objects. So this ground plate, even though it's made out of steel and it probably would not break, we're going to break it anyway. So I'm going to add it to the dynamic impact objects. There it is. Then go over to the fragments. And we're going to set this to this uniform and set the iterations to 25. So it's already set from the previous project. And then click the fragment. So what it's done is it's broken up each of these pieces into a chunk. So you can see each of these pieces now as a separate chunk. The idea behind pre-fracturing is you can set up the pieces you want to break, and then when you run the simulation, those pieces will go flying. So we're doing the pre-fracturing right now. So that looks pretty good. We'll come back over here and let's clear the objects from the impact object list since it's already set up. You know, let's say I want to take this wheel. I can add it, go to the fragment, and maybe set it to like 4 and then fragment it. So I've broken this up into 4 pieces, and maybe that will look cool. Don't want to break every piece up, but that should work well. The other thing that I might want to do before I run the simulation is maybe bang up this tanker. The way we can do that is we're going to use an Edit Poly modifier. So we'll come down here, choose Edit Poly, and we're going to grab some of these vertices, and let's turn on the soft selection, and then turn it down a bit. What we can do is start pulling some chunks out. See, I'm just grabbing some of these points and maybe knock it in like it got banged up as it crashed to the ground. The good thing about this shot, and let's be honest, I designed it this way, is that it's already sort of flying in the air and exploding. So we don't get to see it sitting there and being all nice and then breaking. It's already broken and has holes in it. I did it because, you know, I knew I was doing a tutorial and I didn't want to have to, you know, do a bunch of morph objects and all that crazy stuff. So I apologize, but I took the lazy way out. However, there are ways to do it if you want to. So this will just give you a good starting point, and then you can research it further. Check out the Video Copilot forum, and we can probably help you out. There's some really talented people who visit the forum. So I'm just breaking this up. Just want to make it so that it's not perfect. And we can even isolate this so we can get some pieces underneath. And you can play around with the fall off. So I can make a large indentation like that, depending on how large of a selection you make. The other thing that we saw is, like holes in the mesh. So to do that is a little trickier. What we might do is subdivide the entire mesh. So if we do subdivide, and we have to be very careful with this value. So we'll lower it down, and then we'll do another edit poly on top. What we're going to do here is select some pieces, just like that, and then we're actually just going to hit delete. So now, if we look at this, we see I've cut a hole in this. Then we will take the corner, so then we'll turn soft selection back on, and then take these corners, and let's see. It could be very tricky to select these, so let's see. And basically bend them out so we can rotate them. Maybe we need to lower the fall off of this a bit. But you can see I'm sort of bending out the, the edges a bit. So it looks like there's a burst or a tear in the mesh. So you can go through and add some different slices. I think this is a good start, and then you can go back to the sublevels and you can still add some more. You can still add some more here. If we click that, you can still add more bumps and bruises and things. All right, so this is looking pretty good. We'll go and exit the isolation mode and get back to setting this up. So get out of the edit mode, and let's go ahead and hit C to go back to our camera. And now let's go ahead and back to our simulation. So we've kind of set it up, we've banged it up a bit, and let's go into Rayfire. Now before we run our simulation, we need to define what type of objects are in our scene. For example, we want the ground plane to be a static object, so we'll add that to the static list. And we also want our flattened down sphere to be a kinematic object, or an object that is not affected but that will affect other objects in our scene. So things like a ground or a force that's going to knock something over will stick into this group, and the stuff we want to get destroyed, like the train, we'll go ahead and stick into the sleeping objects because we want them to be static. Then we'll come over here to the physics, and this is where we're going to start doing some trial and error. So right now it's set to the PhysX Mass Effects. So the way it works is you just click on Bake, and it will begin to run the simulation. So now we have that. We can pause it here. So let's take a look. The piece knocks, everything flies, and that's not too bad. I mean, this could be the one. Let me go ahead and save my project really quick. Always good to save and version up. So this is too intense. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. I mean, maybe it's right. Maybe we have a little pan up and watch it fly. But if this is too much for you, let's cancel the simulation. We'll take our sphere and let's stretch out the animation. So if we make it longer, it'll move slower and hopefully not push as hard. So let's try this. We'll click Bake. Okay, not too bad. Again, maybe that's a little too strong. One thing I can do is come into the project time and set this to say film and the length to maybe 200 frames and then hit OK. So again, this might be a little too strong too. So let's cancel that and let's select our sphere. And again, let's stretch this out 2 more frames. And let's go and bake it. Now we're running into some other fun simulation issues. So right now, it went straight up in the air and then it landed back on top of it and then it tumbled over some pieces. That can be a problem and that's okay. We just have to start tweaking some of the settings. So one thing I may do is take our sphere here and let's rotate it, or actually let's cancel the bake and then select our sphere and then rotate it forward and sideways. So this way maybe it pushes the pieces towards us and that way it won't fall down on itself. And the other thing is adjusting the material physics. So the materials have different properties like density, friction, bounciness, and the way it works is you can select the type of material for each group. So here the ground is dense rock, the pieces are also dense rock, but I can change it to something like concrete or heavy metal. And let's say I don't want the bounciness to be so high, I could turn that down, maybe turn the friction up. Friction means it'll stop sooner, like it won't slide as much, and bounciness is just, how much it bounces around. So now that we changed those settings, let's run the simulation again. Awesome. So again, you're going to run into, various problems like this. I might even change the time scale down so that the animation's a little bit slower and feels heavier and bigger. Let's cancel the bake and let's maybe change the material here. Let's try something like concrete. Now, concrete doesn't bounce very much, and maybe that'll help things settle a little bit better. And let's set the ground to concrete as well. And if you think there's just a simple one setting fits all situations, you're going to have a bad time. You want to play around with the different settings and just get the right look. So let's try these. Okay, so it's a little bit better, but again, the piece seems to be flying straight up and back down again. So we might want to work on the object that we're using to shoot everything up in the air. What we might try to do is move it over a little bit so that it doesn't come down right on top of it. And again, rotate it more so that we send these objects forward. So let's try that again. Okay, so that's better. Now let's just speed this up so that it pushes the pieces a little bit farther. All right, maybe a little bit more speed. So now that we've increased the material density by making it concrete, we're going to need some more force to push it up into the air. All right, that's not too bad. We do have a few issues with the pieces landing. It's pretty close. Let's turn the collision tolerance up a bit and then rerun it. Okay, so that's not too bad. It's almost very, very similar to what the tutorial actually looks like. We've got pieces flying. Maybe that's okay. Let's turn the time scale back up to 1. And maybe the gravity to, 0.75. All right, let's go and run it again. Now, another thing I want to do is change the end frame to maybe 150, since our animation is taking a little bit longer for all of the pieces to settle. That should work pretty well, and let's go and take a look. All right, so this looks pretty good. I could keep tweaking it and try some different stuff, but I think you get the idea on how to influence it by adjusting your, objects. Now we can hide that object. We can go ahead and close the Rayfire tool. And now let's take a look at maybe adding some additional debris elements. Let's go and take a look at the lighting for this shot. What I'm going to do is come over here to the lights, and we're going to go to Vray. We're going to go ahead and add a Vray sun. So we'll come up here to the front view, and we'll just drag down. And we can create an environment. Let's go ahead and not do that for now. And we need to set the sun position. So the sun is sort of a little bit behind, something like that. And let's go down to the intensity, and let's lower this down to, 0.1. Let's go and take a look at some of the render settings. One of the things we need to do is put a material into the reflection map. So we'll click on a slot, click Get Material, and we're going to grab a Vray HDRI, and we'll browse. Now we should use an HDRI, but because I want to share the project, we're just going to use this JPEG environment map, and we'll open that up. Doesn't quite look right. It is a spherical map. There we go. Then we've got the map. We need to drop it into the Vray environment setting. So we'll drop it into the reflection as an instance, and we'll also turn on the environment and drop that in there too. What the heck? Then we'll go to indirect illumination. So this is going to be our GI, and we'll turn that on, and we'll set the irritance map down to very low. So this is like low quality, and it should be pretty fast, and maybe a little ambient occlusion. And let's take a look. Okay, it looks amazing. How do we render this out? And then we just do a little key out, and we're good. No. So what we need to do is set up a matte shadow material for the ground. The way to do that is we hit M. Let's create another Vray material. So we'll click on the load, and let's do a Vray material wrapper. And we'll keep the old map. And we're going to matte the surface. This is the thing. You got a matte surface, alpha contribution -1, and matte the shadow and affect the alpha. So none of the default settings are good. Then we'll take this material. This is going to be our matte shadow, and drop it onto our surface. Then let's render a frame. Okay, so a little bit better, maybe a little bit too bright on everything. So let's do a couple of things. Let's come over here to the environment. Let's shut the environment off, and let's set the light intensity down. So let's bring this down quite a bit and try that. So we're just lowering that sun intensity since the shot's fairly even. And then the other thing we'll do is tweak the shader. Okay, so that's getting us in the ballpark. Our shader is just not quite right. So let's go into the shader and play around. So let's bring the glossiness down, which is going to make the material less reflective. Okay, so I think to get the reflection right, we're going to have to change our environment map. So let's swap this out with one that's a little bit more flat. And this should be good. And then the other thing we need to do is make sure that our ground plane with the matte shadow does not reflect. So we're going to turn it off from being visible to the reflection, and then hit OK. And we'll go and take a look. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. There's probably a little bit too much light coming from the ground. So on the matte shadow material, let's turn the generate GI down to about 0.5. Then on our shader, let's make it a little more reflective now that we have a decent reflection map. And let's tweak the setting to make this a little bit more reflective. We'll turn this up a bit. And even turn the glossiness back up, something like that. And let's take a look. Okay, so that's getting us a lot closer. All right, so I think this is looking pretty good. I wouldn't call this a tutorial on texturing, but if you want to look into more texturing tutorials for Vray, I'm sure you can search for that specifically. Now, I want to show you how I created some of the secondary debris. And the way we did that was with some particle flow. So if you hit 6, It'll bring up particle view, and we're going to create a new particle system. So if we right click, new, empty flow. Or actually, better yet, let's create a standard flow. What I want to do is set the position of these particles to be a couple of these different pieces. So instead of an icon, I'm going to select that and delete it. I'm going to add my own position object. So I want to position the particles on an object. And so to add the objects to the emitter, we're going to click add, and we'll just click on a few of these. Click on one here. Click on that one. So we can add a few more, but this should get us started. Now, one of the options we want to turn on is lock on to the emitter. So they're going to stay on the pieces. And let's change the color here to something that we can see a little bit better. We can change this to any kind of object or whatever. The birth of the particles, we want them to stop at 0. So we want it to just be a total particle count, say 500. So there's our particles. Now we need them to fall off of the pieces. So the way we're going to do that is by using a speed test. So we'll put the speed test out here. Let's delete the shape. Yeah. And basically what this does is says, hey, are these particles moving? If they are, let's move on to another event. So we'll take the speed, drag it out of there, and we'll take the speed test and link it to the speed operator. Now the speed is going to say how fast these particles are moving. So let's set it to inherit previous and turn up the variation a little bit. So we're going to play with this in a second. Now, if we go to the speed test and lower the value, the particles are going to start falling off. So now you can see there's our particles. They're flying because they're inheriting the previous speed, but they're also too fast. So we're going to lower the speed, lower the speed, turn up the variation, and turn up the divergence. So check this out. Particles flying everywhere. Heck, maybe we just turn the speed down to 0. Maybe just up a little bit, actually. And lots of variation. All right, cool. So now we need some gravity because the particles are just floating on forever. So let's take a look at some gravity. We'll come over here and we're going to click on the space warps and we're going to do some forces. We have gravity right here. So we just click in here, creates a little gravity node, and then we can go back into the particle flow, click 6, and we're going to add a force. So we'll come in here, we'll do force, and we'll add by list the gravity. So now when we have gravity, which is going to be probably a little bit too strong, so maybe we turn the gravity down a little bit. So now that we have gravity, we're going to need some bounce as well. So we need a collision. So when they bounce and they collide with the ground, they'll bounce a couple of times. Now to create the ground, we also go back to the forces, click on deflectors, and let's just do a deflector, which is a flat plane basically, and then we'll just click and make a big deflector that covers the whole surface. Then we'll go back into the editor, click 6, and let's set that as the collision object. So by list, click on the deflector. So now they're going to bounce, and how many times are they going to bounce? Well, we'll go down here, collide, say 3 times, and then stop. So they should bounce 3 times. So we'll take a look here. So you can see them bouncing off the surface. Now they're bouncing really high, so watch this. That's too high. So we want to click on the deflector and we can lower the bounce amount. And maybe add a little variation, a little chaos, maybe some friction also so they don't slide too much. So that looks a little bit better, right? So let's go back into the speed, and maybe we play around with the variation of this, so we can make it so that the particles are flying everywhere a little more. So we turn up the divergence, and that'll just give us a little bit more space to cover. And maybe lower the speed a bit. And if we want more particles, we can just turn up the birth rate. Cool. So now, what do these particles look like? Let's add a shape instance. So we'll drag that out. And we can click on a piece of geometry that we want to use. So we could just click on any piece. We can also create a group and use multiple pieces, but just for this should work fine. And let's set the display to be geometry, and display geometry. Now we have some geometry, and it's rendering very fast, but we want these to look a little bit different. So what we can do is go into the shape instance, turn up the variation for the scale, and turn the size down so that they're just really small pieces. Now, the other thing we want to have is some 3D spinning. So we can come down here, add the spin operator, and now these pieces will spin. We'll turn this up. And so now the pieces are spinning through the air. Now the only problem is when they land, they're still spinning. What we want to do is bring out a rotation node and link it to the collision. I'm going to take the rotation, set it to random horizontal. And what that's going to do, if we change the display to be geometry, it creates sort of a randomly flat position. However, we need to say go to that rotation. So if we take the go to rotation, bring it out, set it down to about 3 frames, maybe even less with a variation. And what this will do is flip the position into a rotation spot. So it's not perfect, but as long as our debris is fairly small and we can't quite see it, it'll work pretty well. Now there are some ways to get this to work a little bit better with some additional nodes, but this is a pretty simple setup that works well with just a lot of stuff going on. Here we have the debris. We could add some more particles again if we really want to make it crazy. And let's say we don't like that particular object instance. Well, we can just click on another one and find one that we like. It's good if the pieces aren't too dramatic. If they're pretty simple, and that way you don't really notice them with the actual pieces. And then for the horizontal rotation, you can just have a little bit of divergence, which will rotate them so they're not just perfectly flat. Now, as far as the material, we can actually just hit M and apply the same material to this event. Now, sometimes the material can get lost through the different events, so we can just do a static material and just bring that out, and we just may have to put it into each of the events, which actually can be helpful if you want to have, let's go ahead and hold down Shift and drag this down into this event and make it an instance. It can actually be helpful if you want the material to change as it breaks into pieces or something like that. So that should work well. Let's go and hit F9. Let's take a look at our destruction. All right, so it's looking pretty good. Now we've got a lot of bits of debris. I could probably, let's see, turn that speed inherit up, really just add some more variation and some divergence. So like if we really wanted to make this look crazy, as I'm sure you do, we can do something like that and then add some more particles. And I just like to keep the objects, let's see, just keep them pretty small. Let's take a look. Maybe a little less speed, a little bit. There we go. But pretty cool, and it looks pretty decent. So now about rendering. So we'll go back into our render settings. We've already got the look pretty good, But we also want to turn on the motion blur. So we come on here, turn the motion blur on. And I like to bring this down to about 0.75. And the render settings, we're going to add a pass. We're going to add a Z pass. So Vray Z pass, and set the max up to about, I don't know, 800, depending on how large your scene is. And then for rendering, I like to do like an EXR. So we'll just come in here, render folder. Let's call this train tutorial. Open that up and EXR, and you can go click it, or if you just type it in, it'll actually use it. And this looks good. So now we're going to render out our beauty pass. Let's see, we're going to go 0 to 75. Looks pretty good. And take a look at a single frame. Now with motion blur on, it's going to be quite a bit slower to render. And I also want to disable the environment map in the background. Okay, so there we have a frame. It's looking pretty intense. Maybe I'll turn that motion blur down to like 0.5 and the samples to 5. And everything else is already pretty low. Okay, so once you render out the train simulation, so we've got our pieces here. Once you render this out, you're going to probably end up with something like this. So I've got my train, and I'll just drop that onto a comp so that we can look at it. Basically, it's flying up in the air. The pieces are scattering everywhere. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that there's this backlight, this yellow backlight. And what I did was simply took a Vray light and put it behind and set it to a sphere and set it to be like a color similar to the fire. And we'll shut the motion blur off for just a second and lower the resolution down. So where's that light at? Whoa. Not quite where we want it. Let's move it in here pretty close. And maybe scale it down a little bit. What this is going to do is just give us a little bit of reactive lighting, and we just want to keyframe it to fade out as the explosion fades out. So simple little keyframe will fade that out. And then we also want to make sure that the light's invisible so that we don't see it. So I'll show you how to do that. So it's nice because, you know, you have some highlights around the backside and stuff like that. So to hide it, the lights have an option just to render invisible. And that's it. Maybe make it a little smaller. Back it up just a bit. All right, so pretty cool. Just remember you want to fade this out. So auto key and auto key it so that it's no longer on after the explosion's over. Maybe I'll make this a little bit larger actually. One more for good measure. And we can do the color correction in After Effects, you know, some curves. I think this is close enough for now. All right, so this is the idea. We'll turn that motion blur back on and turn the render size back up to HD or 720p, whatever your project is, and render it out. It's going to have your transparency in the background. Also, go to the environment and just shut the background off. So just uncheck Use Map. My name is Andrew Kramer. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.